What do you need to have done to be hated by the entire world? Hold on, before you get confused, we're not talking about some run-of-the-mill serial killer or anything like that. We're talking about this guy, and how he rose to the top despite being surrounded by the nastiest controversy in the history of tennis. Meet Nick Kyrgios, the bad boy of tennis. Let's start with a quick introduction to get you up to speed. Nick is not your regular tennis player. The 27-year-old Australian is easily one of the best athletes of his generation, and it's not just because of the stats. You see, Nick has one of the best unconventional techniques you'll see on the court today. Now, to give you some perspective, most players prefer to hit their serves with force and accuracy. You know, the old-fashioned way. But in Nick's case, the Australian prefers to spice up his game with trick shots that leave his opponents baffled and unable to return the ball. It's like he's playing a game of tennis while also performing a magic show. But Nick's playing style isn't the only unconventional one. His interaction with the crowd is not like anything the world of tennis has ever seen. While some people appreciate the Australian fan for his current form, others have a lot to say about his disrespectful attitude. You see, besides tennis, Nick is very famous for being a bad boy. The tennis player has some serious anger issues, throws the worst tantrums on the court, and reacts very oddly in some situations. Now, we're not saying that Nick is the only player who has ever thrown a tantrum on the court. I mean, let's be real. Tennis can be a very intense sport, and sometimes things get out of hand. That's why players tend to get very expressive on the court. But when you start to say stuff like this, unprovoked, you might start to think he's got a few screws loose somewhere. But like they say, everything happens for a reason, right? And in Nick's case, maybe his unconventional behavior can be linked to his upbringing. Nick was born to George and Norlila on the 27th of April, 1995, in the city of Canberra, Australia. His dad was a house painter, while his mom, Norlila, was raised as a princess of the Malaysian Selangor royal family. So you could say Nick has royal blood flowing through his veins. But if we're being honest, that doesn't give him a pass to be rude, right? Well, it turns out that tennis wasn't really Nick's first love. You see, being the last of his parents' 3 children, Nick was obsessed with basketball. He loved the sport so much that he'd wake up to watch the Celtics play when his mates were still snoring in bed. And the best part was that he was a natural at the sport. So much so that he was selected at 14 to play for a regional team in Australia. But basketball wasn't the only sport the young champ was good at. He was also very good at tennis. In fact, his mother preferred it. By the age of 10, he was playing in Australia's Under-12 National Championship. But there was a problem. You see, if you know anything about building a sports career for a child, you'd know that it costs quite a fortune. And young Nick was actively trying to build a firm career in both basketball and tennis. And with time, it started to pull on his parents' finances. So, when the Australian Tennis Federation offered to sponsor Nick's training at the Australian Institute of Sport, his parents made a life-changing decision for Nick without consulting him or asking him what he wanted to do. And so, Nick had to quit his first love, basketball, for good. Just think about it. That must have really hurt. And it did. Completely giving up basketball was one of the most difficult things the Australian ever had to do. And as you would expect, he faced some serious obstacles. First off, Nick was significantly overweight. And as if that wasn't enough, Nick suffered from asthma and despised the repetitive drills that were forced upon him in tennis practice. So he had to find a way to adapt, and he had to find it fast. He relied on risky, fast-paced serves and ground strokes, as well as some off-putting trick shots and baseline drop shots that left his opponents dazed and confused. By finishing points quickly and avoiding unnecessary movement, Nick was able to conserve his energy and still come out on top. It was a risky strategy, but it was one that would eventually pay off. In 2008, at the young age of 13, Nick began his professional career in tennis, and surprisingly won his first junior title that same year. But it wasn't until 2013 that he turned pro after scoring a wild card to compete in the French Open. He faced off against Radek Stepanek, who was ranked number 8 in the world at the time. Now, you'd expect that a rookie like Nick, facing off the number 8 player in the world, would feel intimidated, right? Well, Nick was the complete opposite. He played with so much confidence and skill that anyone who didn't know the two would think that Nick was the number 8 player in the world. The Australian eventually defeated Stepanek, and as you would expect, this win boosted his ranking score. But more importantly, this win put Nick on the map. But Nick was only getting started. In 2014, Nick earned another wild card to compete in the 2014 Wimbledon. Everyone was buzzing to see the promising Australian play, and Nick did not disappoint. During the tournament, Nick faced off with tennis legend Rafael Nadal and came out on top. The Australian's electrifying style of play left everyone watching in awe as he took down one of the biggest names in tennis with his mind-blowing pace and trick shots. It was a performance that no one could forget, and one that cemented Nick's status as a rising star in the sport. Following this win, Nick started to draw the attention of everyone. The fans, other players, and even tennis legends like Tim Henman, John Newcombe, and Paul Annacone. Practically everyone was cheering for the 19-year-old, who had the potential to become one of the best players in the world. But little did they know that things were about to go south. It all began with Nick acting nonchalantly during matches. In 2015, during the Wimbledon Championships, Kyrgios was accused of failing to return several serves intentionally, leading to accusations that he was tanking the match's second set. However, he denied these claims. Everyone gave excuses for Nick, with most people agreeing that he was just a young kid and maybe the pressure was getting too much. Nick was going to improve, and he had everything to become a superstar. Or that's what we all thought. In 2016, Nick was caught tanking another match, this time against Misha Zverev at the Shanghai Masters. Nick was handed an 8-week ban from professional tennis. When the Australian was asked about his behavior, he didn't apologize or promise to get better. Instead, he went on a 2-minute rant about how his parents did this or that, sounding like a spoiled brat who just misplaced his candy. I don't really like the sport of tennis that much. I don't love it. It was crazy. When I was 14, I was all for basketball, and I made the decision to play tennis. I got pushed by my parents, and to this day, I can still say I don't love the sport. Now, nobody is saying that Nick doesn't have any right to voice out his feelings, but they shouldn't be the reason for you to squander an opportunity that millions would die for. Nick began to receive lots of criticism, even from legends who had previously praised him, with John McEnroe calling for his retirement. After that nasty episode at the Masters, people expected Nick to return to the court on a new leaf, but his attitude only got worse. During a match against Stan Wawrinka, an on-court microphone caught the Australian throwing sexual jams at the Swiss's girlfriend. The Australian was slammed with a deserving $25,000 fine afterward. At this point, it was becoming clear to everyone that Nick might never get to the heights they'd hoped. And these people were right, because Nick's attitude on and off the court took an even uglier turn. And this time, it wasn't the kind of regular outbursts that some players have on the court. We're talking about the kind that gets you thrown out of the Italian Open. During the second round match of the 2019 Italian Open in Rome, Kyrgios got disqualified from the tournament after he lost his cool and hurled a chair into the court in a fit of rage. Apparently, he was getting rattled by the audience moving in the stands during his service motion. But instead of taking a deep breath and trying to refocus, he decided to complain to officials and his own coaching team. And as a result, he received a penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct. To make matters worse, Nick had already been given 2 code violations earlier in the match, one for ball abuse and another for unsportsmanlike conduct, which resulted in him forfeiting a point. And when he received a game penalty later on, things really went off the rails. Kyrgios went on a tirade, spiking his racket, kicking a water bottle, and ultimately throwing a chair onto the court. As you'd expect, Nick's outburst started to overshadow his incredible talent. But instead of using that as a wake-up call, he continued to take his frustration out on his fellow players. Even Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal weren't safe from his wrath. During an interview with Business Insider on February 28, 2019, Rafael Nadal had this to say about the Australian. He lacks respect for the crowd, his opponent, and himself. I don't think he's a bad guy, but he lacks a little respect for the public and the rival. Imagine a tennis legend who had seen it all and done it all saying that about you. At this point, it became clear that not only was Nick's terrible attitude not doing him any favors, but it was just a matter of time before things got out of hand. Nick was playing in the Cincinnati Masters and was up against Karen Khachanov in the second round when things started to get interesting. Nick asked the chair umpire, Fergus Murphy, for a bathroom break, but Murphy refused. Now, most people in this situation would just suck it up and keep playing, but not Nick. He disobeyed Murphy's instructions and went to the bathroom. When Nick returned from going to do his business, he broke not one, but 2 rackets in a fit of rage. And just to top it off, he called Murphy a fucking tool at the end of the match. After the match, Nick was slammed with a $160,000 fine. Along with the fine, the Australian also took home the unwanted record of becoming the player with the most accumulated fines in tennis history. Now that's a record that nobody wants to hold. But as if that wasn't enough, Nick fell from grace even harder than anyone could ever imagine. His career ranking took a nosedive from 13th to 137th in the world. It was at this point that he finally got the message loud and clear, and for the first time since his rise to fame, Nick started to show some genuine remorse. He had a serious wake-up call and decided to turn over a new leaf. In early 2022, Nick turned to Instagram to open up about his struggles with mental health. He talked about how depression had taken its toll, and how the intense pressure of public scrutiny had pushed him to some dark places. After that post, Nick did turn a new leaf. He even played a couple of games and finished the match with 0 issues. Everything was looking bright again, and Nick was reminding the world of just how good he was. Unfortunately, this new leaf did not last, and it wasn't long before Nick fell back into his old habits. Spitting in the direction of fans, yelling at umpires. He even went on to break the over 150-year-old custom of wearing an all-white outfit for the aftermatch ceremony at Wimbledon in July of 2022. And when he was asked about it, he had this to say.
Kyrgios' reasoning?
Because I do what I want.
We honestly thought he had started down a new path there for a second. Well, too bad he didn't. So, does Nick deserve all the hate he gets? We'll leave that for you to decide in the comments. What we do know is that he's got to shape up real quick before he permanently ends his career with his unfortunate behavior. That's all for today, folks. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to learn more interesting things about your favorite tennis players.